Okay. Yes.
Hello from New York City. My name is Frank Henschke and I run the Siegel Theater Center here at the Graduate Center CUNY in Midtown at the City University of New York, a public institution of learning. I am honored to have been invited by Milo to take part in this School of Resistance, where learning and unlearning is taking place and where different viewpoints coexist next to each other in a public arena. And many thanks to the Berlin Academy of the Arts for hosting this significant and meaningful event in the time of Corona. In the search of strategies of resistance, Milo Rau, the IIPM, the International Institute of Political Murder, and the National Theatre of Ghent founded 2020 a globally networked School of Resistance as a live stream debate series. A symbolic institution of the future, it has now come to the Academy of the Arts in Berlin and, drawing on previous projects, examines aesthetic practices of resistance. Artists and activists discuss art as a transformative, reality-creating practice, and I hope one day this school will also come to New York City. We need that. Milo Rau and the IIPM have been working on the contradictions of global capitalism for almost 15 years through installations, books, and political interventions. The intermedium of activism in art leads to an expansion of artistic strategies and at the same time contributes to dissolving the boundaries of the concept of art. How can art react to the state of crisis? How can it contribute to strategies of resistance? 6 cinematic works by Milo stay in the center of this investigation in these 5 days. The last days of Ceausescu, the Moscow trials, which will be today, the General Assembly, the Congo Tribunal, Orestes in Mosul, and the New Gospel, his latest work. In doing so, the School of Resistance at the Academy of the Arts examines the conditions of global art productions and the strategies of IIPM itself. Planned before but during the pandemic, the School of Resistance aims to facilitate encounters for experts of change from the arts, research, and activism. As a symbolic institution of the future, it is decentralized, networked, global, interdisciplinary, intergenerational, and intersectional by nature. Alike in school, we are engaged in learning and, probably more importantly, in unlearning notions and practices. In exchanging perspectives, we put our convictions at stake, at risk, and we put them on the line. Ultimately, we aim to create a growing archive and a repertoire of aesthetic strategies of resistance against the oppression and the suffering in the world. And now I would also like to welcome our great distinguished panelists next to Milo, who of course does not need any introduction. We have with us Juliane Rebentisch, and she's the professor of philosophy and aesthetics at the Hochschule für Gestaltung in Offenbach, the School of Design in Offenbach, and she has been a member of the faculty at the Frankfurt Institute of Social Research since 2014. She was a vice president of the HFG Offenbach from 2014 to 2020, and president of the German Society for Aesthetics from 2015 to 18. Her most recent publications are Theories of the Present and Aesthetics of Installation. Andreas Viel is a director and screenwriter. He's considered one of the most distinguished representatives of the political engaged art. He develops his own screenplays and films for cinema and has received over 50 national and international awards. In addition, Viel writes and directs for the theater, including Theater Basel, Schauspiel Stuttgart, Gorki Theater, and the Deutsches Theater in Berlin. His plays and productions have toured to numerous places, including Theatertreffen Berlin, and have been translated into more than 10 languages. He is a member of the European as well as the German Film Academy and the Academy of the Arts since 2007. And if we understand right, he is joining us right out of the hospital. He broke an arm. The theme of today is set by the great French philosopher and political scientist Geoffroy de la Grassinerie, and who will actually join Milo tomorrow for an important one, I think, with Laura Capel, who will be moderating tomorrow at 4 p.m. So really, welcome everybody. And now my question to Milo. Milo, Impossible Art, tell us a little bit more about the idea for this panel and what Geoffroy has in mind for us.
This beautiful and extensive introduction, and hello Andres again, and of course Juliane, together with me on the table here at the Academy of the Arts. Actually, the name comes from a book that, and I will make it short, that Geoffroy de Laganerie, so a long-term friend of mine, wrote, I think only some weeks ago, published some weeks ago, and I think fast as you are, Frank, you just read it in an afternoon, as I know you. And actually he's tackling, you could say, a dialectic contradiction that you have as a political artist, that you are producing inside a system, the institutions, the rhetorics and the public of and perhaps the traditions of representations of a system that you are criticizing at the same time. So you are in a kind of in a locked-in syndrome of political art, and that's what Geoffroy calls the impossible art. So that there is a decent art somehow is impossible by term, because you are always using the language that you are criticizing. And of course he's asking himself, how can we reflect on it? And of course the first step is to understand that there is no other art than political art. Even if you are not engaging, you are engaged in non-engaging. So what could be an ethics and then an aesthetics, and the reflective aesthetics of being locked in like this? And is there a way out? And if there is not a way out, how do we tackle it? How do we change institutions? And I think we will, from representation, documentary art, to changing institutions, to produce other ways of representing, and of course distribution, what we discussed yesterday with Georg Seeslen. How can you distribute films? Where does the production process start? Is it only screenwriting and directing and editing? Or is the distribution of a film and how it is distributed, how it is produced, also part of what you should call political? So of course we come here back to an old fantasy of, I think, the bourgeoisie, to somehow liberate the individuum from the society it is living in, and liberating an art and having an independent art. And I think the question we want to tackle today, how resistance is possible. Because of course, let's say a postmodern cliché says the resistance is impossible because even the act of resistance, of revolution, is iconic as a tactique and as lifestyle in neoliberalism. So as I say today to Juliane, I don't want to repeat this a bit boring sociology of criticizing impossibility of being political in neoliberalism, but that's the basis on, I think, on which we are discussing. We are trying to create solidarity. We are trying to give space to voices that are unheard. We try to represent the world in another way and to create new institutions. And on that level, of course, the School of Resistance, I understand as a live stream, but I also understand, as you said very beautifully, as a way, a school of bringing practice and theory together in unlearned, unknown ways. Because you, for example, would connect with an actor from New York or from the hospital or from Amazonia or from other genres or from, I don't know, even not activists or not artists, but just lawyers or and so on. So mixing and creating new collectives. So that's what we try to do here, even if we are also a bit locked in the Academy of the Arts at the very moment. And I think that's the starting point. So I give again the word to you, dear Frank.
Yeah, you're right. It's an extraordinary undertaking you started, and I think Geoffroy's question is quite significant. He also writes, "Shouldn't we all be ashamed making art?
Yeah,
writing poems, doing plays in the face of the brutality of the world." He quotes Sartre, who said, "What is literature in the face of a starving child? What does it really mean?" And I think we are in a time right now where we have to ask this fundamental question. There was the big shock, perhaps the end of the idea of the modernity is of Auschwitz, where all of a sudden it was no longer just going forward. It was back now. Perhaps Corona is the second big shock. And it says actually we are back in Middle Ages. The virus is coming through us, through our skin, and we have no way to defend it. We were not prepared. I remember seeing a graffiti in Paris after a Yellow Vest protest. It was beautiful. It said, "Le spectacle est fini." So the show's over. It was, I think, sprayed on a supermarket, actually, or some office building. So in a way, it's about doing theater after the end of theater. Already Beckett, Heiner Müller taught us, that we have reached a certain point of the end, but still, of course, we go on, we renegotiate and reinterpret. My question to Juliane is, is art impossible? Is it impossible to do practice art?
Well, I guess it's a bit too fast to say the spectacle is over, because it presupposes that there is no such thing like a politics of the aesthetic. Yeah. And yesterday there were a lot of strands in the discussion where, the potential of aesthetics was stressed, where the spectacle, actually, the theater has the potential to expose the logic of law, for example. So I'm a bit hesitant to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. Maybe one can distinguish like two main paradigms. One would be along the line of the avant-gardist tradition. Yeah, let's get out of the frame of art. Let's end the spectacle, and let's become something other than art, namely politics. Yeah, and that's a very, hegemonic, even, or dominant idea of what art should be doing right now. So art then should become something like a creative ally or something of activism, and become something like, I would say, design. Obviously, when I use the word design, I don't mean design as in producing pretty surfaces or something, but more like on the deep level, the design is always involved in also forming or constituting the usages, the wants, and the life forms, yeah, in which design intervenes. So it's also, and of course, in the more progressive field of design, that's taken up politically. So that means, and some of your work can be understood in this direction, I think, let's produce something that is not in the world, but should be, like a tribunal, a world parliament, or something like that, and produce a model that then can be taken up and should become part of reality. Yeah,
and can produce reality.
And can go into serial production, as it were. Yeah. So that's a kind of a design approach. And that obviously has some function and productivity to it, but I think it's somehow doing away with the art thing, and it also presupposes, and I would like to talk about that too, that there is something like an avant-garde, and that is the creative class. Yeah, that one could ask, of course, isn't that a chauvinistic and outdated idea that we must look at artists/designers to learn something about what is to be changed in the world? So everything, I think, then hinges on how we think the relation of activists and artists here. But coming back to my, defense of the spectacle in that regard, I would say in Milo's work and the whole debate yesterday, to those who were attending the discussions yesterday on the last days of the Ceausescu's, what we have here is a work that is realist in a totally different way, and where art's relation to reality is also thought of differently, namely that nothing in reality stays the same once it's injected into the frame of art. Yeah, so reality changes when it becomes art, and what's in the middle is, of course, representation. So you give a realist artist, what does he do? Yeah, he gives an image of reality, but I would say he gives an image, in the better cases, in such a way that the reality of representation itself comes into the picture as well. Yeah. So what you do, I guess, in the film on the person harvesting tomatoes in South Italy as a new Jesus is that you are not only telling another story, but you're also referencing ways of representation of famous Jesus stories. Yeah. So I think it's also, and I wouldn't underestimate the political potential of that, reflection on the ways in which we imagine or in which we represent reality. Yeah, I think that's an important point, and that's a potential of spectacle, a potential, nevertheless, that from the perspective of politics might look like a weakness. Yeah, that everything, once it's injected into the frame of art, somehow is tinged by the as-if character of art. Yeah, so even people who are lawyers in real life, once they're on stage with Milo, they're also becoming actors of their own life, of their own position. But this kind of distancing that happens also has a specific politics to it, and I think these two lines are somehow sometimes running up against each other, sometimes in an interesting relation to each other. So that's my longish answer to your very big question.
Thank you. That is important, and I do agree. We do need the idea of the spectacle, the theater, or the performance, or the intervention, or something appearing on a space what people are watching. Andras, you are a filmmaker. Your films also restage or create in a documentary style a discussion on ecology, on the big questions of our time. How do you see Milo's work? What does it mean to you?
Well, there are a lot of parallels in a way, because the way he intervenes is very familiar in terms of, let's see the example tonight of the Moscow trials. I just, in a way, staged a trial, something what will happen in the future, ecocide. Germany is sued by 31 nations, 2034. Because of the negligence of climate targets and the way how they blocked climate targets in the last 20 years. So by giving something like an example, like modeling reality, something like an inducement or an impulse is in the world, we just show by modeling reality, by giving many people a chance to create something which has this kind of impact, something will happen. So I'm a strongly believer so in the impossibility of possible art. When I think back of my very, very first experience, I was a student in psychology. I went to the psychiatry in prison just for an internship, and I just was asked, well, do something creative with these people, and they were locked in for 24 hours in small cells, and so I just observed them, and suddenly they started something. They were painting, and some they're doing extinguishing cigarettes on the hands of the other inmates, very cool things. And I just created something with these people, and suddenly there was such an energy. And when you read all the reports, you read a lot about the lack, what the people are incapable, they're aggressive, they're dangerous. And I just tried to find out what is the potential. And that's a question of the human being. If we believe in the potential of human beings, if we don't believe in the lack and all the incapabilities, then we have a starting point. So we empower people to think about their own situation. We empower people to create an expression of themselves. We empower people to go beyond their own way of thinking. So in a way, we are just more or less like a medium for empowerment. And this was such a strong experience because I was 25. I didn't believe in art at all. I just did something, and then the ward came, or all the doctors, and they said, "You do horrible things. People get so excited, so we have to give more pills to calm them down." And I knew, okay, that's it. That's resistance. We start just with empowerment, and of course, the system strikes back by giving more pills, by calm them down. But it was a first step, and it was for me something like a clue of experience. I said, okay, this is the way. It's a question of believing in the capabilities of people, believing in the possibility of change, and the institutions, of course, they are as they are, and it takes years. And I knew after 2 years, they killed me. And they killed me in a way, they threw me out, and I was sacked. But anyway, I had 2 years to do something. And maybe after me, somebody else is coming, changing something.
Yeah, that is an important notion of the possibility. I think, if I remember right, Juliane wrote in her book that there should be an understanding of art in the light of its very best possibilities, what it could and can do. So my question to Milo,
can I just, to bring back the idea to Milo, because the idea when I say modeling, what Milo did in the Moscow trials, I only could watch the first 30 minutes because of the Wi-Fi in the hospital. It's quite low. Anyway, institution. But but even watching the first 30 minutes, what I saw is in a way a process of healing. He showed something which could be the right way to deal with it. It's not reality, we know it. And in a way, my model in the last film, Ecocide, this trial in the future, Germany is sued by 31 nations, is a model which now many people, I get so many notions, so many comments, that's the way we have to deal it. So many people in the law sector, in the legal system, just went and called me and said, okay, you described a model which could be not in 14 years, but maybe in 1 or 2 years, we will go for it. So it's in the world. We have to bring something into some oxygen into the world. And if we are lucky, and we are not always lucky, I failed many, many times. We have maybe to talk a little bit more about the failure, not about the success. But in this case, I can say it is a success because the idea is in the world, and some people grab it and develop it. So art is this little oxygen in the engine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're doubting it?
No. I
think there's more oxygen.
Yeah, my question to you. Of course, art is in the imaginary, in the symbolic, but also in the real. Your School of Resistance, your work. Is it symbolic? You also say it's a symbolic institution, but is it symbolic, or is it intending to real change?
No, I think the first try is always symbolizing a normalization, or kind of introducing or designing a possible normalization of the act that is only possible in an artificial framework on a stage. You know, the first parliament is staged, and then it becomes normalized, and then you would vote all 4 years, and it becomes part of social life, a ritual that you wouldn't question anymore, and even not remembering as an introduced and a kind of invented, you know, ritual. So this is quite interesting, and that's why for me, let's say, an artwork that is interesting for me has two sides. And there is even failure in failure, but I think it's important that you show the process, how it was produced in the work itself. So for me, that's an ethical point, that you could see the making of while you see the framework, and you even see at the same time what this framework, this design produces. But you see all the failures by doing it, perhaps even the pressure you have to do on some people that says, but no, I don't want to take part in this design. I'm perhaps more interested in this one or that one. The difficulties of solidarity to make a kind of a frame together, to function in a symbolic space, which is very, very difficult. For example, the Jesus film for me was, the biggest difficulties was not to make a Jesus film, because everybody who is not completely brain dead can do a Jesus film, of course. You give costumes to people and then you have the Bible and that's it, you know. But the difficult thing is to bring together 42 groups of different people that is kind of programmed to fight one against the other to not change the situation. Because, I mean, one thing I learned, and it's a sad truth, that the slave doesn't want to make a revolution, he wants to be master, you know. So to bring together people to say, let's do revolution, or we could call it now, to make it more simple, art together, engaged art together, is normally 50% at least against what is logical to do in the system they find themselves, or I find myself, as an artist too. So it's kind of, it's counterintuitive and it's intuitive what we do. And I think to show these difficulties of this process, to have a solidarity act of art is one point, and the other point for me is really the reproductive thing, that we don't represent and duplicate reality, but we create a place where things become real and reality is produced, you know? Sometimes violent realities, sometimes reality of dissent, but sometimes also utopic realities. And that's what I mean with symbolizing. I mean, there's in Goethe, perhaps you know that better than me, Juliane, as a professor, but Goethe has an idea of the symbol, for example. In the theory of Goethe, it's not a symbol in the way how we understand it in common language, that it is something that is somehow not real. It's something that is, at the moment when it appears, it's real. But it's symbolizing reality, and it is reality. And this, for me, is the double face of documentary art, you know? And I would call the documentaries that Andres is doing and that I am trying to do too, utopic documentaries. So kind of inventing a situation and then filming that situation as you would documenting it. So a very strange, and perhaps that's all about art, that you would kind of the different regimes of fiction and documentary art all the time try to bring together, to find a place where fiction changes into reality and reality is refictionalized and is opened again, you know? And this is a process to the future, but it's also a process to the past. You can have also a utopic view on the past. When we are talking about resistance, we have so many examples of resistance against capitalist society that are forgotten, that is untold, that is, you know, and if you go in history books of 19th century, 18th century, 17th centuries of other cultures, you will find so many past things that are not revealed. So the past is unwritten, the future is unwritten, and I think art is a kind of a totalization of the present moment where past and future, I mean, now it becomes a bit mystic meat somehow, but in reality, and not just because we are talking about it or writing a beautiful poetry, but as an act of common creation.
I mean, if I may step in, I think I'm just interested in asking back to both you and Andres about the relation of the participatory work you're doing with people that has empowering potential, maybe therapeutical potential, a healing potential. That's what something Eyal Weizmann brought up yesterday in Reenactment, for example, but also empowering people to be creative, to unfold or express their potentialities. But this is only one side. Yeah, so you can invent forms for this, but then there is a secondary audience, yeah, to whom this is documented and then shown. Yeah. And I'm wondering also with regard, especially to your work in Belgium and your work in the Congo, like how, I mean, the whole like ethical point for the second audience is how do they come into the picture? How do you prevent them from just consuming politicality? To come back to our initial question, how do we prevent, since it is pretty obvious that we're living in a time in which bourgeois society, comrade, right, is pretty eager to have art be political. Yeah?
Yeah.
And this has a whole set of, not so nice ideas one can come to mind, like, is it delegation, from the political realm to the cultural realm, that art shall be political right now? Has it a compensational function, and all these kinds of questions come up. So I have somehow, I'm a bit nervous with the second audience, and I think with the two politics I described in my first statement, the second one, namely the one that questions representation, the reality of representation, might also be a means of, making the audience reflect on their own habits of what they had in the bourgeois institution of theater. So I guess my question to both of you back is, how do you think of these, like, first participatory audience and then the second one to which is the first production is played back?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You want to start?
Yeah. So many items you mentioned. I try to be short. First of all, with my last play, we tried something which was, for me, was a new approach, because we invited scientists, 13 scientists of different fields, economy, environment, and to develop with the audience in workshops something like scenarios for the next 10 years. We just said we will have a financial crisis, we have a crisis, of course, of the environment, and develop with the participants together with the scientists scenarios. And it was a very interesting day, because a lot of very different old, young, I don't know, from all over the city and Germany, people came. And many more people were interested to come and to join, and there is a necessity to create something and to think about science, but not in terms of science which is aloof, far away, to grab it and to integrate it into forms of art. And so it was a common process of writing, in a way. So you could say the artists are lazy. We are using scientists, and we are using all the people who joined us to create something. But it was a common experience, and I was very euphoric in a way, because out of this material we developed something, and out of the simple it became real. Because after the show, we invited politicians in a very concrete way and said, okay, what are the functional ideas? So not a vicious circle, but a circle in terms of a production from science to the audience, with the audience, into the theater, from the theater into politics. So to have this kind of empowerment in a very practical way of thinking. And so it was just one example, and of course it's just a little drop in the ocean. But again, it's something I felt, this strongness of capability, the strongness of empowerment, and it was something like a first little trace to go on in terms of participating experience with science and with politics. And of course, I'm not naive. We have to think about power structures. We have to think about many things that art can do many things. And we all know, we are discussing it in the very beginning. We're doing impossible art in a way, because they just embrace us and kiss us and say thank you. And that was it. So, but anyway, it was like this little gemstone. And we have to take care about it and develop it. And I think, Milo, you do also a very strong work, and maybe it's very good to have this kind of schools to say, okay, there are many people all over the world doing something. How can we bring it together that it's not just the drop in the ocean?
I think to answer to your question for the second, what you call the second public, which would be on the screens and etc. So I think there's, I mean, there are very simple movements. I mean, what you described, that you would have in this second public kind of people that is already empowered and that can change, and that are, for example, politicians or managers of enterprises and etc. And you address these people. More generally, you can also address the consumer society, which is consuming a film, and the next day, as an example from the New Gospel, are consuming tomatoes. Because one beautiful thing about capitalism is that capitalism is immoral. So if everybody buys sustainable tomatoes, capitalism will only produce sustainable tomatoes. And if everybody buys tomatoes that are made under the law of mafia, they will only produce this kind of tomatoes. And if you make, or if you think an artwork as a whole circle of distribution that distributes the dignity that you show in the film as something that you could buy later in the supermarket as a tomato brand, and as a visitor of the film, you can buy these tomatoes and you are informed, and perhaps even with the ticket you buy it, or already the ticket you buy, you can support cinemas that are closed and you don't buy your ticket on Netflix, etc. So these are things we are trying out at the moment, very simple things to kind of introduce in the distribution, not only watching, but everything is a process of distributing. And in the end of the day, to put it on a more theoretical level, I think it's the old question of how to bring what bourgeois artwork tells you, knowledge, emotion, together with practice. How to link in the process of distributing art a new practice or an artistic practice of the public together with what the artwork is telling you. How do you can become, as a visitor of the artwork, part of what is happening in the artwork, of the revolt of dignity, for example, in the Congo Tribunal, that you could then, what we did with this film, we used this film as a tool to then, with 1,000 copies, perhaps you talked with Arne Birkenstock about it, that we sent, because we had our last discussion after, I think, the Congo Tribunal, that we then sent to many, together with the Assemblée of the Lawyers' Assembly of Congo, we sent to villages that there they are used as a tool to organize trials, completely then independent from even, I don't know, being included in any way of distributing art in Europe. It's really kind of a tool. And that's how the book, and very beautifully, of Geoffroy, by the way, ends. He said, in bourgeois art and in the art circuit, the art as a methodology, as an example, as a pedagogy of how you should act is very bad seen. It's not real art, you know? And he said perhaps we should re-establish this value of art, that art is a school, that you can learn from art how to live better, you know? So this seems very, I know, very humanist now, but indeed.
Indeed. And what about the negativity of art? I mean...
no, absolutely, you know, the deconstruction of everything.
Yeah, Milo, my question to you, speaking about the audience, as Juliane mentioned, Brecht said he wrote for the children of the technological age. Now we could say we have the children of the digital age. You call this the school of resistance. And there's the tradition of the German Bildungstheater, the educational theater. And as Brecht, in a way, followed that idea of a Goethe and Schiller, and Juliane argues actually also Artaud did. And are you part of that Bildungstheater? Do you think of the future of engagement, the future of resisting, is performing knowledge? Is it a pedagogical institution?
Yeah, it's a part of institution. I mean, this idea to call it School of Resistance came from the landless movement. We were collaborating for Antigone. And what they do, they have their own, I don't know, agriculture, they have their own schools. So they made where you learn different things. You can read the Bible, for example, you have courses in religion, but in another way. You have courses in agriculture, but in a sustainable way, etc., etc. And then we started dreaming about another humanist topic, but we are here. And we talk from where we are, from the School of Resistance, to bring together knowledge and how knowledge is connected to practice in different cultures, in different parts of the world, together, to, for example, understand that if you need land, you can occupy land. If this land is not used by the landowner, it is allowed by the Constitution of Brazil. That's what the landless movement is doing millions of times. But it would also be allowed in Germany. You could also occupy here. Occupation is legal, you know. So, and this is something you can learn in a kind of a global school of resistance, which you didn't know before. And something very shocking, by the way, of a global school of resistance is that you have structural similarities of structural violence that are extremely the same in everywhere you go in the world. You will understand quite fast. That was for me the outcome of all this, that we are really living in one world and everything is connected. Everything is really connected. There is no there's a little bit of disconnection everywhere, but it's one big, I mean, I'm not paranoid, but it's one big economical, cultural system we are living in. And perhaps as the first generation ever, you know?
I mean, I'm a bit concerned with the knowledge paradigm for art, I must say. One often talks like that, you know, art produces knowledge like all other fields, but just in its own way or something like that. And I think that's somehow jumping over a potential that art has in its negativity, namely in not producing knowledge or more knowledge or better knowledge. Why should the artist be better than a theoretician or a journalist or people who are doing work, or in the beginning you said, or just lawyers or lawyers? Why shouldn't they produce the knowledge that we need? So why art for that? But art can do something very specific, namely put us in a certain relation to our knowledge production, which I find where something like below me there's written decolonize the spectacle. Yeah, we have the decolonization of the theater can happen in really playing back the problematic knowledge production that the Bildungsanstalten of the bourgeois theater have constituted or co-constituted and sustained for a very long time. Yeah. And of course, this is also connected with new forms of post-colonial, you know, work that's been done both on the practical and the theoretical and the critical level. But the relation of art is not to top them all, to say, okay, there are post-colonial theories and activists and so on, but our knowledge is the knowledge that we need. I think it's not like that. It's more like also reflecting on the specificities in which that harmful kind of knowledge production sits in the very apparatus of the European theatre, yeah, and to address that, and in a way that is where critical work and aesthetic work and artistic work come together.
But I think the negativity you are addressing and the positivity I was addressing a bit too naively, of course, and my artworks are extremely negative. You know,
I know that. I know that.
So, but it's, I think these two sides coming together, then it's something interesting happening. Because you can, I just read yesterday by Fundis, The Long Summer of Theory, where you have all this Adorno chapter, and everything is negative, and it's impossible to make in this system. It's not, no way out, etc.
Yeah, that's a different.
You know, I know that's a different negativity, or even melancholy, or depression of the intellectual, and which is very modern and very postmodern. And then you have another way of saying, okay, if you create, I don't know, decolonized frameworks of collectives producing knowledge, there will be produced something that is hyper positive. You know, is not only saying we don't want to have racist violence again, we don't want to have patriarchal violence again, but that would produce a way of telling stories by accident of people coming together and processes of production that was unforeseen and not foreseen, you know. And this is the kind of knowledge perhaps you could even not call it knowledge, because what about would this knowledge be? Because this knowledge is aimed to the future, you know, is to producing reality. It's not knowledge about a reality that is better than a scientist would have.
And I think it's, for me, it's a competition of producing knowledge. I would say, because many other institutions who all the time from morning to night produce so-called knowledge, we know they fail. It's just the way in cliches it's repeated, and we are fed up with it. So I think it's our necessity to deal with knowledge, and not only to show how it is produced, but even to produce better aesthetical knowledge, to go beyond the common production of knowledge, and by maybe sometimes a naive curiosity, by asking questions, by listening, going into the system of thinking, of talking, of just observing this system and analyzing it and grabbing the substance out of it and transferring it on another level. And I think we can be very successful because we have a better way of production. We have a better way of research. We have more time than journalists. We have even more time than scientists. We are much more free to bring levels and layers together. And so I won't neglect the power of producing knowledge.
Yeah, I would relate to that, and also to what Juliane said, that today by accident I had a discussion with a journalist about Pasolini, and we were asking ourselves, why do we like Pasolini, the filmmaker? And what is in his iconography and his way of filming that we like? And for example, then we found out that we like that the over-shoulder shot is not existing in Pasolini. That you have the one and then you have the other, and there's not always this dramaturgy of the space, who is where. Or you have, for example, a face watching something, and you see everything that this face watches, and you don't even see what this face sees. You know? So that there is a kind of a deconstruction or a totalization of images in an archaic way that kind of escapes to this way of capitalism to have an economic of telling a story. You know? Perhaps it's boring. Perhaps it's a bit too much Catholic art, whatever. But it can also lie in this, you know, that you make pictures in another way. That you don't have this kind of Schuss gegen Schuss, over-shoulder, all this bullshit from television. That you just say no to that.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, like this, like work on conventions of representation, right? So that's, I think, as I said, an enormously important aspect of it. Yeah, not just look at the contents and say, okay, hey, here's another story, and we might be really like good in researching it and so on.
But content is an alibi in art, no? It's content is not exist. For me, content it doesn't
exactly.
exist.
So yeah, that's the problem. If people like concentrate on that. So yeah, exactly. Frank.
I mean, speaking of Pasolini, what Pasolini said is that we should throw our bodies into life, and life is dangerous. And I think what Milo's art also shows that he puts himself also at risk. And dangerous art, what he does. The Moscow trial, if we see this today, you will see that was dangerous. The Congo Tribunal, they are dangerous territory he moves in. And why I think his work is important, and his School of Resistance, is that capitalism and the neo-capitalism actually normally uses now the artist as an example why capitalism works. The artist is the model, look at the artist, he has no money and he applies, the actor is rejected all the time, but he believes in himself, and then he becomes a star and comes to Hollywood and becomes an Oscar. And if you do the same, and he never asked for health insurance, and for wages. Also Heiner Müller said, theater, why we have to keep in mind, is against the machine of theater. Real theater actually sees the representation of the state, of the system, in the theater itself. And we have to resist, we have to fight against it. It's not the goal to be part of it, become the master, as Milo said, to get also on Broadway. Here in America especially, all is about the success. But to say, no, these are different models of producing, they are different values, and it is about inclusion and like kind of, as he says, global conscious, to keep in mind the tensions between the reality and, of course, the vision. And we have, so I think this resistance is of significance. So, Milo, your dangerous approach in a way? Is it calculated? Is it thought out? Is it natural that it comes to you, or is it intentional?
This brings me to a question that is projected here in the Academy of the Arts, because we have the questions of the public, and it's completely related to what you say, because there it's a question, because of course we don't only put ourselves as the artists into danger, but also everybody who is working with us. And what is the ethical standing point about this? Because of course, when I can say I put me in danger, so I don't care, and then whatever happens, it's up to me. So that's I think this only depends from the psychology of everybody, how he likes to work, more in panic or more in a quiet way. So that's really, you are born like this or like that. But I think what is interesting is what happens with, and for me the biggest danger of people is not that there is a real danger and it could be a bomb in a car, or I don't know, or the Russian Secret Service could kill us all. For me, the danger is the danger of the representation. And especially when you do documentary work, that you put somebody in a film and you say, this is the real person, this is the real life, that's how she or he is. And I could talk longly about this ethical problem, how long you can discuss with people until you find the way of edited, you know, because you say, okay, you have this role in the film, but at the same time I know it's not the whole story. And I had it now when I was working in Geneva for this opera where we presented 18 people on stage. So what are your 4 sentences, your 10 sentences? And I know it very well when you give, for example, an interview and then you say, okay, they cut it down, but when is it still real, what you said? You know? And how do you deal? I would like to ask this Andres, because you are somehow even more a real, let's say, documentary filmmaker, especially in your earlier work, than I ever was. How do you deal with the, you know what I mean? With this?
Of course. in my first film, I had a lot of fight with the actress, with the main actress. She was attacking me, and it's all in the film. But at the same time, I was staging this scene, so we were playing with these different layers of representation, and I think. If this is part of it, or if at least the contradiction of my way of representation by, for example, in Addicted to Acting, when the actors said, we are fed up with the way you ask questions, we are fed up with the way you are trying to direct us. We are in a documentary, we don't get paid. So this kind of reflection of the process, I think, it's always a necessity to show it's, of course, my story. In the very end, I'm sitting in the editing room, as you do, with Katja, and then you make your film. Editor. Yeah. And so this is a power we have, and I think we are the storytellers in the very end. But we are liable to it. Liable.
Did we lose just?
Yeah, I think he has a problem with the stream. Huh? Yeah, he's right. Frank is...
Now, I can tell you the most challenging work for me in a documentary is not preparing the film, is not researching the film, is not shooting, is not editing. The most challenging work is when the film is finished, because then I pay for it. Then I have to deal with the protagonist and tell him, look, this is my story and you're part of it. So do you accept it? You fight me, you hate me till the end of your life. And it happened, and that's failure. And we have to talk also about failure, because I failed a lot. I really used my power, I used my strength, and I made my film, and I paid for it, and the protagonist paid for it. And so it's a high price. Because the actor has the protection of the role, and the protagonist, normally they don't get paid and they don't have protection.
Yeah, so there is a price to pay. If art has a value, it has a price there because there is the market. Juliane, a question for you as someone who really monitors contemporary art across the fields and across the what is the art we do need? What do you think at the moment, what we are in, and zeitgeist, as you say, you know, that invention, we come to the help of the time we happen to be in. What do you think are the marks? What are the things you talked about, the open artwork like Echo or Works in Movement also, but what do you think is contemporary art, what we need most?
That's for Juliane.
Well, I don't know whether I can answer this question. There are still so many different things happening at the same time that I think it is worth doing something like we are doing now, namely take a close look on what we are doing as in the fields of practices that aim at the full weight of art, yeah, look at its own social and political dimension, and yeah, look at the different models there are and the different strands that run up even in one singular piece, as to my mind is often the case in your work, Milo, and discuss them. Yeah, so I wouldn't say or propose. I think that's also would be a false role if a critic came up with a to-do list or something.
I would like that.
No, but I think you know, to come back to the question of form of representation, to the violence of representation. You were talking about that yesterday, and also Andres was just talking about that of course, making cuts in a film and to cut away certain bits and pieces of the material is also a violent process. So you have to stand up for your decision, and the question is, how do we deal with that, and what kind of ethical, so that's for me already a whole big book that we are opening up here. So what's this relation of camera towards the person being on camera? Yeah, what do we aim for? Are we aiming for the true moment, and is the true moment also one in which the person stays opaque? Yeah, where the opacity of the person is part of the truthfulness, for example. I think that's also in the Pasolini, like the way that the camera is not overseeing the scene, is not producing a transparent image, but something that somehow is not so easily consumable because there is an opacity of the camera vis-a-vis the actors. Yeah, so this whole theme, to describe that in detail, for me is already a big question. Of course, the ones that we had before, like what's the relation of art and knowledge? Of course, I didn't want to play off, you know, the production of different stories against the negativity of reflecting on the conventions of such stories. I think they go hand in hand, but I think it's more like from my observation also of the art discourse that I feel I have to stress the second aspect so much. Yeah, because people feel like, okay, art is about knowledge production. It should become something like criticism, and in the content, it has to be research and so on and so forth. Should be like another form of knowledge. Then I would say, okay, there we're losing a lot if we are subscribing to this, I don't know, unbalanced stress of this aspect. Yeah, so that's why I'm always saying, okay, there's something like a politics, not only of form but also of negativity that is there also, and I would defend that normatively, since you were asking of normative judgments. They're, in my case, pretty much committed to this negative side as well. And if we lose that, I would say, okay, then maybe you know, something that is, of course, super important work, yeah, educational work, etc. But that's not specific to art. So that's also a question that always is with me. When do we call something art, when or when not? Yeah.
Yeah. Because I see another question from the public. We have some comments, and I think it's very closely linked to it. The question is, I sum it up a bit because it's quite long. Is it possible to produce in the distribution production systems VR, where there is an artist from Europe, for example, and people that has no regularization in South Italy, immigrants, without even papers or names? Can they work together in a way that it is not only post-colonial but decolonial, in a way that they would be really empowered in a structural way? Can art bring structural change when people with structural power and people that are structurally powerless come together? And it is questioned, and it said no. I think it's impossible. This commentator says, and I think it's, for me, that's an expression I can very well understand. It's perhaps the melancholy of Western Europe somehow to make this statement. What I made many times the experience in art that you can change structurally and only in bits, and that's what I call the positivism of art, and where I insist, even if I completely follow you, Juliana, in what I like as an artist and what I mainly do. Even if I only add 1% of positivism, 99% I would edit and think about the light, you know, and about the reality of the emotion and the Brechtian levels and whatever. So, I mean, that's my work. But still, to take again the new gospel, what happened, hundreds of people now have papers. They have a house because we invested in it. We want to change the laws. We want to have a tribunal. It's for serious. We want to change. And I think it's a necessity that the people with structural power, like everybody who is in this panel, united as in the education apparatus, like you, with an institution, like you as a very known director, Andres, we have to use these possibilities. We have to change, to decolonize. I think it's really, this is very serious. I think it's really important that we use this positive power of art. That doesn't mean that we, you know, that we completely forget what is the I don't know, the complexity of the, and we have to reflect on. And we try, in my way, in my funny way, perhaps doing it in the new gospel, that you see that when activists and artists come together, what sometimes happens that it doesn't work for both sides, it's a failure. Yeah, but still we have to try, we have to believe in it, and we have structurally to use the production money and the production power we have to change structurally the situation of the people that is at least included in our films or in our projects. And it never really works out. Perhaps it's 10 people, perhaps it's 20 people, but we did it and we do it and we continue doing it. And I just want to underline it, because this is it possible that somebody from Western Europe would ever not only repeat the exploitation system, but change it. I think it is possible to change it. We see it in the history of I don't know, even of our own continent. What happened, I mean, the liberation of all minorities, etc., etc. You know what I'm talking about. I don't go in these details, but it happens all the time. And it's really possible.
And I think what you say, maybe we are just not more than catalysts. So in the very beginning, we create something like the symbol of our work. It becomes some sort of reality. And then it's transferred, what I call the oxygen. And sometimes it's very small. I remember a crucial scene for me. I showed a play in the province of Brandenburg. And we had a debate afterwards. And in the beginning, it was about the play. But then it switched. Nobody was interested in me anymore, in me as an artist. I was totally unimportant. The play was unimportant. But the people in the audience hall were talking about their situation, about the situation of experience of right extreme terror, everyday terror, by violence, by people getting beaten up, etc., etc. And people that in the very end exchanging emails, they built a group. And I was standing aside. Nobody was talking anymore to me. Nobody was asking for autographs. Nobody was just saying, bravo, what you did. I was just
bravo.
totally unimportant. And it was the best experience, I tell you. It was the best experience because I am, of course, somebody who needs success and who needs good critics sometimes. And I want to get love all the time. But this experience that I was just unimportant, it was so great. It was such a relief. I knew that's the way. We have to be catalysts in the very beginning, then the process, the symbol becomes reality, and we are out of the game. They have to take over, not us.
Yeah, as we took over so many times, you know, Andres, I think I took over so many times. Everything I'm doing in my films was made by somebody else. I'm kind of collecting the symbols of others and the practices of others. You know, so it's, yeah, it's passing through, that's true.
Yeah. And then we go to the next spot and doing the same thing, and then we are unimportant. We can go throw our pieces of art out of the window. Boys, it's a quotation of Beuys, throw my piece of art out of the window, and that's very good. So no museums, no installations for the end of the society and civilization. No, we just do it in this very moment, and then we do it, and then it's over and it's gone, and we have to go to another place and try again.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's obviously one demands of progressive art making that it has an eye of the materialistic preconditions of this, and to turn that, not let your production just be determined by it from the back, but turn it into material itself and somehow expose it and work on it. But of course, the productions within, for example, theater are connected to larger structures that you can show, but not change alone. So this is where, you know, an individual artwork runs up against larger structures where you need a political movement or where you need something else than art. Yeah, and that's, I think, also important to have in mind. And I come more in my reflection from the visual arts. And in that field, there is also a problem with, you know, we insert our little bombs and then we move on to the next space. That's been the structure of the biennials and so on, where somehow the question of time and sustainability is totally key. So I think that's not trivial to think of this relation of course, aiming at what you can control, and to turn that also into something that can be discussed, and turn that into something that informs the artwork on the deep level. Yeah, but also to be very clear about what art somehow cannot do, where the institution of art is around it, where this is also on the materialist level, often, you know, something that's not been taken into account as much as it should be, I think. And then it's really about, okay, how are the structures that take up what's been begun? Yeah. I mean, in the case of the Houses of Dignity, you know, is the Catholic Church, which is interesting, yeah. But also, yeah, this is a question on so many levels, yeah, and how we translate these fleeting moments of our interventions, where a symbol becomes reality, into something that might link up with a political movement and with other forces that are lay outside art. Yeah.
I think perhaps what we should learn, because one of the curators of this event, Kasia Wojcik, she gave me a book, I think it was called Against Purity, that we have to learn that purity is not possible. So we can, for example, create houses of dignity to house people, that they get papers and go out of this circle of not having paper, not having housing, etc., so that they can be legalized. But you only can do it together with the Catholic Church, because they have to pay for it, how it is now, you know, somehow. And then you are linked to an institution that you perhaps criticize partly. And I think what I learned many times by working I don't know, as an artist, that purity is not existing, and that we have a lot of criticism in our times, I think, kind of measuring what we do with a dogma of purity that is not existing, that is just in reality, in real practice, is not existing. And this makes me sometimes very, very tired and very disappointed, and very, it produces self-hatred somehow. Because you say you should do this act pure, you should do this act, you know, without depending from everything, without any negativity somehow. But it's impossible. And how can you act with this, you know? And
I think, Milo, it's something I deal with it from the very first day of my work, and I can really feel the doubts and the pain by doing compromises when you work with an institution or a TV channel or whatever. And I think the only thing what we can do is be liable, say, okay, this is the structure, we work with this or that partner. And so this is the impact, and because of this, I had to do this. So I'm not a slave, I'm still an artist, but to make it transparent and to show this kind of transparency, what from by money, by if it's a Catholic church, if it's a TV station, if it's a producer, we are in all these structures, of course we are, from morning to night. And I would say 2/3 of my energy is trying to deal with these structures and to get the money and to make the decision, okay, I work for TV and I know the rules, and they're different than in TV, and they're different in a theater, of course. But if I want to reach a lot of people, in a theater I reach maybe 1,000 one evening, and in TV I reach whatever 5 million, and it's another institution, of course. And so let's talk about the structures and talk about our fights and talk about our failure.
Absolutely, I know. For me, the thing that produces the most depression and self-hatred and the sleepless nights is less the TV station and the institution, because I can accept, you know, this kind of contradiction on the meta level. I'm not really concerned, because I really can change it, or only partly, but inside the team, for example, inside how you work with people, as you say, you make kind of a deal and you say, okay, this is how you will be in that film. And you try to find together a way, but perhaps it's not for you and not for the other person. Sometimes you are exploding and you have 500 points and you are only 2 people, and sometimes you are 2 and you have even not 1 point, you know? So this kind of impurity of there is not always the flow and the symbolic space, because to make a symbolic action you need a lot of bureaucratic shit to do, you know? Or editing a film to have in the end this kind of reflective realism that you want to have, but it's completely constructed. So I mean, and so on and so on and so on. So it's there are so many sustainability. It's impossible. It's somehow possible, but not, and so on. So I
would like to say there is also a connected side to it, what it produces, and the innocence of the viewer, the spectator, the audience also is no longer there, the purity, and that's a good thing. I think Heiner Müller once said when he came to West Germany, he said, when I go through the Fußgängerzone, the walking zone in Gelsenkirchen, everybody looks so innocent, I could scream, I cannot accept it. They are not innocent.
No? Of course.
And I think what you do also in your work, that's the description of the violence of the Moscow trial, whatever, the viewer himself or herself is all of a sudden is a participatory element of it, is someone who has to question herself. What am I watching? What am I doing? The Mosul play, you know, these things you did there also, you know, so you went there shortly after the war. And so you also produce something that no longer request the purity of the Broadway show that we have here in New York, where nobody wants you to think about anything. You know, it's the exact opposite. So I think your work, with all the complications and nightmares you have because of the internal struggles, but also produce so that the audience member has to question himself, herself, and is part of that. And perhaps that is what the modern contemporary art also produces in a contrast to what there was before, where you were consuming one artwork, one painting, one sculpture, one film, and now it is something where one is involved.
I don't know if you see this signal, Frank. So we have the signal from our curators that we have, I guess, now 15 minutes left, and we should come smoothly and slowly to an end. So I am sure you prepared a kind of a roundup.
15 or 5 minutes? How many minutes?
15. So it's not 15.
Yeah, no, maybe we should go to some audience questions. No, I have not round up. I don't know anything more than anyone else. I'm just learning with you guys. Maybe we should go to some audience questions.
Yeah, we can do that. There was one I remember asking about the difference, and I was when I was thinking about impurity and the impossible of being innocent as an artist working in representation. There was something with Lacan, that you have kind of reality always is the real, you know, that reality always is something. And for example, if you describe violence or you produce violence together with your actors, it's a violent moment. You can't be in the moment of producing and filming violence. You can't be in a Brechtian distanciation. You can add this distanciation later, but not in the very moment. I mean, it's just like one little contradiction that I think in the current times is for many people, let's take the trigger warnings and everything, a real problem. That they can't take violence indirectly. And there's something true in it. And if you're in the representative arts, as we all are, we are tackling with this kind of how could we call it, with this kind of sadism of representation, that we shoot on the innocence of the spectator that is not used to see, let's say, the miserableism, is not used to see the structural violence, the racism, etc. For example, I had with Arte a very long discussion before we made the film, The New Gospel, because there is a that's a very good question. I will come to it later. There is just another one. We have always projections of questions.
Yes,
and there is a moment when, in a casting, one actor coming to the casting is kind of torturing a chair for 5 minutes. And from a moment that you are understanding that this guy is taken by structural racism, and that you are kind of impressed that he knows all this, and you understand that I also would know all these words and all this violence when I would have to play a kind of a racist soldier, because our culture knows. So he knows and I know. So it's not him individually. But at one point, this scene getting longer and longer falls into something else, which is kind of an aesthetic sadism. And then you're asking yourself, would you go there or wouldn't you go there? And I think that's a question we wouldn't have asked 20 years ago. So it's a it's a question of now, you know? Yes, voila. It's not really...
Yeah, that's the
let's be precise. What was your decision in this very moment?
My decision was I had to decide. No, it was a bit because they were asking me to cut it, so I didn't. It was more a kind of a father-son behavior. So, of course, then you get renitent when you should edit, but then you don't. But, I mean, I completely understood this argument, but I wanted to bring the structural racism to that point that it gets questionable as my act somehow, or as an act, a scene in the film that is quite fast edited, but here's a scene, it's the longest scene, 3 minutes. And everybody who watched
because
the film
for me, the crucial point is who has the right of the last decision. Yeah, you can do it, you can provoke it, and who has, in the very end, who decides it's in the film or it's not in the film. So it's you, and that's what I call transparency. Yeah, you can be humble and say, no, I see it's provocation, I don't do it, but in the very end, it's you and it's me. So, and I think there is no democracy in art in the very end, because in this very last decision, if there's no institution, no Catholic Church, no TV station, it's you and it's me. We tell Katja to cut it out or to bring it in, right?
Yeah, but
so we are not pure.
No. That's impossible. That's impossible. That's true. Yeah, of course. Yeah, at one moment you need a decision, and it depends from what you actually decide. Of course.
Yeah, and that's
most of the time.
That's why we are liable.
You go into a kind of a middle way, I would say, because it's collective, and then we would like kind of find a way that everybody is d'accord, you know. So that's the. Can we go to the last?
Maybe also like that I find this kind of discussion that would be a very productive way of taking the current moment with the trigger warnings and so on and so forth up, namely in asking ourselves, how are we invested in a history of violence that has always also been a history of aesthetic, what you call aesthetic violence, right? How are we still like informed by it, yeah? And to make that the kernel of the debate, instead of, like sometimes it's done with the trigger warnings, instead of purifying the aesthetic realm as if, you know, that's a bit to me as if bourgeois society would now create conditions under which it doesn't have to be confronted with its own history of violence. Yeah,
violence, absolutely. Yeah. It's only the elite that want to be in a structural violent position without watching the face of this violence. Actually,
exactly. And these micro decisions of, you know, how do we bring that in, that we are really informed by that history is, I think, super important. And just to stress that.
So that one question for Juliane, I guess. At what point does the didacticism of these Lehrstücke produced by companies like IIPM drift into the pastoral? Somebody is asking. So when is art, I mean, to perhaps translate it in the terms we used, when is the positivism of art really whipping out the negative craziness of it? I mean, what is the tipping point for you that you say, okay, that's not art anymore, that's kind of pure education of the masses? I will.
Where do you stand on that? I would say if it's like one can just ask the question, if there's nothing to appease, and I think that somehow the Brechtian aesthetics is a good, I always forgot, is it point in case or case in point, whatever, that obviously there's more to it than the didacticism, and that one could even say that, you know, this idea is of something coming together, that in an instant you can understand the conditions of society, that this somehow multiplied or somehow self-deconstructed in the way that Brecht's plays were received, produced over and over again, and so on. So that's a point, just structurally, in the moment when there is a production that would achieve the aim of just delivering a message, it would cease to be art. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And fortunately, Brecht never achieved that.
He was not Brechtian enough, somehow.
Well, there are different strands in the Brecht.
Maybe at the very end, since the Moscow trial film is coming up, maybe say a few words to our viewers and to people who want to see it, who might not know about it. Also, the people you encountered who now became part of the news. So tell us a little bit about the work.
Yeah, I mean, the Moscow Trials, that's a film or a performance we did in 2012, 2013 in Moscow. And it was not a reenactment, but a kind of restaging of 3 trials with the people involved. So trials against artists from the government of Putin at that time, and still So under the, let's say, under the alibi of offense to the religious feelings of people, he tried to whip out dissident artists or dissident exhibitions, namely in the Sakharov Center. So we restaged these trials, for example, against Pussy Riot, as the most known. This trial was only coming up during the preparation, so I knew them before that, and then it was made into a show trial, and we restaged these 3 trials with an open ending, with an independent jury, but following the Russian law, and we filmed everything what happened during, before, and after these artistic show trials. Now I have really, I have to announce that at 7, this movie is not on Facebook, like for example this discussion, because then it seems that then we lose the rights to Facebook if we stream it there. So that's problematic. So if you want to see the film at 7 now, you have to go on www.adk.de, www.adk.de, the internet page of the Academy of the Arts in Berlin. And there the film is streamed. And of course on the pages of all our friends, like for example the page of the Siegel Center and so on and so on. Schaubühne. And after the film, we will have a discussion with Victoria Lomasco, a Russian artist, which was in the film. With Thomas Ostermeier, we invited Kirill Serebrennikov. He has other problems now. Thomas Ostermeier will somehow take his position as his very close collaborator and friend from the Schaubühne, also a collaborator of this film. And Sandra Frimmel, an art historian, which was included in the film as one of the dramaturgs of the film, and the researchers will be here too. It will be moderated by Florian Malzacher, a very good friend and one of the most interesting theater critics and writers and dramaturgs and curators of Europe at that moment. Yeah.
Well, so then wonderful. Thank you all. Thanks for the Akademie der Künste for hosting us again, Milo, coming up with the idea, and not just having the idea, putting it into motion, and having also an entire support system to create it, and also to support your support system with the support system. So it is remarkable. It's truly, I think, a symbol and a representation of what theater at the moment, so in contemporary theater, zeitgenössische, what it can be, and perhaps what it should be, and what is most needed. And it comes up now, it appears on the stage what you are doing, so it is totally connected to what we have. And yes, I think also it is part of a healing of the world, and towards the healing of the world, and the global conscious you have truly is so significant, including the participatory aspect of the artist. Is something that really should be taken very, very serious for everybody who studies theater, who produces theater, and who goes to the theater. So thank you all, and thanks Andres and Juliana and everybody involved, the entire crew.
Yeah, good healing,
behind this
Andres.
Computers. So thank you.
Take care of your
Gute Besserung.
Ja,
gute Besserung.
Ja. Tschüss, vielen Dank und an euch noch einen richtig guten Abend. Der Kampf geht weiter. Gut.
Thank you, Frank.
Tschüss.
Tschüss.
Ja, ciao.
Ciao,
Macht's gut.
bye.